As the diplomatic crisis between Washington and Moscow hurtled towards an unknown precipice, the strategic situation on the ground in Eastern Europe has taken a dramatic and devastating turn. The city of Pokrovsk, a linchpin of Ukrainian defenses in the Donetsk region, has fallen to Russian forces after a brutal and prolonged siege. The collapse of this critical stronghold represents one of the most significant military defeats for Ukraine since the early months of the war. This development provides a grim and violent backdrop to the Kremlin's defiant rejection of President Donald Trump's ultimatum. For the Ukrainian military, it is a catastrophic loss, punching a hole in their defensive lines and opening a gateway for Russian troops to advance deeper into the country. For the White House, it is a stark illustration of the limits of its current strategy and an event that dramatically raised the stakes in its escalating confrontation with Russia. The final battle for Pokrovsk was a scene of overwhelming destruction. For weeks, Russian force has been systematically strangling the city using their vast superiority in artillery and air power to obliterate Ukrainian positions. In the last 72 hours, the assault intensified into a final, decisive push. Russian aviation relentlessly dropped massive glide bombs, powerful weapons that Ukrainian air defense struggled to intercept. These bombs, weighing over 1,000 pounds each, turned fortified concrete bunkers and multi-story buildings into dust, leaving Ukrainian defenders with nowhere to hide. Following these punishing aerial bombardments, waves of Russian armored columns, supported by infantry, launched coordinated attacks from multiple directions, overwhelming the city's depleted and exhausted garrison. The strategic importance of Pokrovsk cannot be overstated. For months, the city served as the main logistic and operational hub for Ukrainian forces in the entire Donetsk sector. It was the primary artery through which troops, ammunition, and supplies flowed to the front lines. Its robust rail network and road connections made it indispensable for Ukraine's defensive efforts. With its fall, the Ukrainian military has lost its most crucial anchor point in the region. The collapse creates a large and dangerous bulge in the front line, forcing a major realignment of Ukrainian forces. More alarmingly, the capture of Pokrovsk provides the Russian army with a direct and relatively open route to advance westward toward the Dnieper River, which has long been seen as a natural defensive barrier for central Ukraine. Russian military planners now have a clear path to threaten all the key cities and potentially cut off a large portion of the Ukrainian army still fighting further south. In Kyiv, the news was met with a mixture of grim resolve and quiet desperation. In a late-night address to the nation, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky acknowledged the loss of the city, describing the situation as extremely difficult. He paid tribute to the soldiers who had defended Pokrovsk, calling them heroes who had fought bravely against overwhelming odds. He vowed that Ukraine would not surrender and would continue to fight for its sovereignty. However, his address carried an undeniable tone of urgency. He made his most direct and desperate appeal yet to his Western partner, specifically the United States, for immediate and decisive aid. He argued that without a dramatic increase in the supply of advanced weaponry and ammunition, Ukraine would be unable to stop the Russian advance. The Ukrainian military general staff issued a formal statement explaining that the withdrawal from Pokrovsk was a necessary tactical decision made to preserve the lives of their soldiers and allow them to regroup in more fortified position. While framed as a strategic choice, the statement could not hide the reality of a major battlefield defeat. The falls of Pokrovsk landed like a political earthquake in Washington, where it immediately became entangled with the ongoing crisis over President Trump's rejected ultimatum. The news of the city's collapse further inflamed the debate within the administration, with senior officials seizing on the event to support their opposing arguments on how to deal with Russia. At the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Peter Hegseth argued that the defeat in Pokrovsk was the predictable result of a failed policy of incremental support for Ukraine. He presented the collapse as undeniable proof that sanctions and arms deliveries alone were no longer sufficient to stop the Russian war machine. In an emergency meeting with the president, Secretary Hegseth reportedly stated that watching Pokrovsk fall while Moscow openly scorns a direct American ultimatum makes the United States look weak and ineffective. He is forcefully arguing that a direct military strike on strategic targets in Russia is now the only remaining option to alter the Kremlin's calculus. He believes that only a demonstration of American military power can shock Moscow into halting its offensive and prevent the complete collapse of the Ukrainian state. This view is being challenged with equal force by Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard. He has presented President Trump with a fresh intelligence assessment that used the fall of Pokrovsk to argue for extreme caution. Her analysis suggests that the Russian military, while having taken heavy losses, will be significantly emboldened by this victory. The intelligence indicates that morale within the Russian forces on the front line is surging and that the Kremlin is portraying the capture of the city as a major turning point that validates their entire war efforts. Director Gabbard's assessment warns that a U.S. strike on Moscow at this precise moment when Russia feels it has the upper hand militarily would be perceived by President Putin as an American attempt to steal his victory. This, she argues, would make a massive and disproportionate Russian retaliation not just likely, but almost certain. She is making the case that the battlefield victory at Pokrovsk has made the Russian leadership more, not less, risk tolerant, and that a U.S. strike would be pouring fuel on a raging fire. The director of the Central Intelligence Agency, John Ratcliffe, has provided detailed intelligence briefing that both sides of the arguments are using. His agency's reports confirm the high cost of the Pokrovsk operation for the Russian army, noting significant losses in both personnel and armored vehicles. This data is used by Secretary Hegseth to argue that the Russian military may be overextended and vulnerable to a sudden shock. However, Ratcliffe's reports also detail how Russian forces are quickly consolidating their gains, moving air defense systems and logistical support into the captured city, and are already preparing for the next phase of their offensive. This information is used by Director Gabbard to argue that Russia is not pausing but is instead pressing its advantage, making any American intervention even more likely to be met with an immediate counterattack. The diplomatic fallout is being managed by a beleaguered Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The collapse of Pokrovsk has sent a wave of panic through Eastern European capitals. The governments of Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are now openly questioning whether the current NATO and US strategy is sufficient to protect them. Secretary Rubio has been in constant communication with his European counterparts, who are expressing extreme anxiety. They are caught between their fear of a victorious Russia on their borders and their terror of a direct US-Russia war erupting on their continent. Secretary Rubio is relaying this deep allied concern to President Trump, warning that a unilateral American strike on Moscow, while perhaps intended to demonstrate strength, could be seen as reckless by key allies and could threaten the unity of the NATO alliance itself. The pressure on him is immense as he tries to reassure allies and manage a cohesive diplomatic front, while the White House openly considers military actions that many of its partners pose. The humanitarian crisis, already severed, has now reached a new level. The fall of Pokrovsk has triggered a new flood of internally displaced people, with tens of thousands of civilians who had remained in the city and surrounding villages now fleeing westward. They joined the millions of Ukrainians already displaced by the war. This presents a massive challenge for international aid organizations and for the Ukrainian government. The issue has drawn the attentions of Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is coordinating with international health bodies to prepare for the public health consequences. His department is working on contingency plans to help manage a potential new wave of refugees that could spill into neighboring European countries, creating further instability. He has warned the president that a wider war would lead to a humanitarian catastrophe of a scale not seen in Europe since the Second World War, consequences that must be considered alongside the military and political factors. In Moscow, the capture of Pokrovsk is being celebrated as a great triumph. Russian state television has been showing endless loops of Russian flags being raised over administrative buildings in the city. Military analysts on state media are hailing the victory as a brilliant feat of arms and a testament to the strength and skill of the Russian military. The victory is being used to generate a surge of patriotic support for the war and to mock the United States. Russian officials are pointedly framing the capture of the city as their true response to President Trump's ultimatum, a response delivered not with words, but with military success. This narrative further corners the Trump administration, making the ultimatum's rejection appear not just as a diplomatic snub, but as a challenge answered and won by Russia on the battlefield. The collapse of Pokrovsk has fundamentally changed the strategic landscape. It has inflicted a grievous wound on the Ukrainian military, brought the Russian army closer to its strategic objective, and placed unbearable pressure on the administration in Washington. The event transformed the theoretical debate over striking Moscow into a real and urgent dilemma. With Ukraine defense crumbling, President Trump is now faced with a choice between accepting a major strategic defeat by proxy or escalating the conflict in a way that risks a direct confrontation with a nuclear-armed and newly confident Russia. The fall of a single city in eastern Ukraine has pushed the entire world closer to the brink of a much wider and more dangerous war. Many of my listeners, like 70%, haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel. And so many of you don't even know that you haven't subscribed. And that is actually what makes the show going. It's almost like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask again and again, because it enables us to grow and grow and grow. And we're going for the long haul here. And listen, if this is your first time listening to So Hey Rich, you don't have to subscribe. You guys, you're first ones on me. But if you have watched the show before, it's like you are a freeloader now. So all I would ask you is, if you have seen this show before and you like it, help me, help my team here. Hit that subscribe and like button now. And we will continue to build the show for you. That I swear. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. That's all for me for today. I will see you soon. Bye for now.